Today we're gathering around the campfire with Jonathan, a QHS member whose life is as exciting and grounding as a hike through the mountains. But what trails did he tread to reach these heights? Let's trek into the wilderness and discover the adventures that led Jonathan to where he is today.
Hello, my name is Jonathan M., and this is my prequel. I'm 82 and counting, and so I've had a very good life, a lot of challenges. Linda and I have been married for over 54 years. We have four children, and we love them. And the great thing is that they love one another and really good relationship with each other. They're very supportive. And as we all go through challenges in this life, we just all do. And our children are old enough to have gone through some challenges, but it's really been wonderful. I'll start with my heritage, and from my father's line, because there were documents handed down to him. From my mother's line, I don't have that information. But from both of them, we're from basically Scot-Irish heritage. There's probably a lot of others, because there was a lot of mixing of things going on back in the day. My father's line starts in around the 1300s in Scotland. Supposedly, one or more of my ancestors fought under William Wallace, and later, don't know if they were escaping or it was part of the planting that later happened in Ireland, not sure, but they moved to Northern Ireland. Then in the 1700s, the early part of the first half of the 1700s, they moved to the Carolinas, and once again took up fighting the English. They fought in the American Revolution under I'm getting back to William Wallace, under Francis Marion. He was later known as the Swamp Fox. My great-grandfather thought enough of the patriot Francis Marion that he named his son, who was my grandfather, Francis Marion, as first and second name. And then my grandfather named my oldest uncle Marion, carrying on the patriotism that they were raised with. My father was a patriot and schooled me in a lot of things in the early 50s of information he was getting before internet, but he was getting papers written to him by ex-FBI people and the such. And he instructed me about a lot of things that were going on in our government that weren't normally known so much. So I had a good education, but starting back earlier than that, let me see, both of my grandfathers were ministers, and my father and his father were both Baptist ministers. And I think my mother's father was Church of Christ, and also there were some, at least one circuit rider back in the day. And I think that was kind of in the South and maybe Texas. I'm not entirely sure on that. So I grew up in a Christian home and have followed Christ since I was 3. The reason I know that is because I was born in LA in 1943, and we moved to Arizona, southern Arizona, in 1946. But I remember having my mother leading me to accept Christ when we still lived in LA. So I've known that, and that has been the guiding light, the guiding principle in everything in my life ever since. Went to a classical high school I'm not sure if it was in Illinois where he was born or in Rhode Island later, but where he took Koine Greek in high school. And then in seminary at Brown University, he also had Greek. So I grew up with Koine Greek in the family. And that's kind of my early prequel here before where I am now and what I'll show you in a bit of what I've been doing. So when I was in junior high, I read through one of his Greek grammar books, and I was fascinated with that. In high school, I tried Spanish for a year. In college, I tried French for a year, but my memory was just horrible for being able to remember. But when it's on paper, I can handle it. So anyhow, that's kind of where things went there. So yeah, my father started my father, by the way, was born in 1883. So he was almost 60 when I was born. So I was kind of raised by a grandfather figure, and he had been in the eastern states. The Baptist ministers moved around. He'd been in some regular Baptist churches. I heard that he wore a Prince Albert suit. I mean, very formal type of thing. But then later on, he became an evangelist and he and some other brothers went through the lumber camps in the East, preaching and holding meetings. And then he traveled with other brothers across the states, sometimes doing street meetings, things like that. And I grew up with a lot of his stories of things of where God basically came through for him when they were just out on faith doing ministry. He came through the Phoenix area where we now live in when there were just dirt roads through this area. So anyhow, moving on, I was born in 1943 in Los Angeles, and in 46 we moved to southern Arizona, an agricultural county, Pinal County, where had a dirt road in front of our street. One of the pictures you might see is of me tending our garden when I was, I don't know, grade school, some age. But it was very different. I grew up wanting to be a farmer or a rancher, but we only had a half acre, so you couldn't really do that. So I would some of our neighbors down the road had raised cattle, had cattle pens, and I learned to drive on a little Ford tractor with a blade on the back. I'd volunteer to use that to clean out their cattle pens, and in return they'd supply us with manure for our gardens. In high school, I joined Future Farmers of America just because I loved it and could work with it. I raised a couple of hogs and a steer another year, and I did learn to work a forge. I made some tools along that line, but those are just the fun things. I had very good teachers in both high school as far as English and math. And both of my parents had been teachers. My dad, as well, being a minister, had a period where he taught English. My mother had a life teaching certificate in Southern California. I think she for a while, she taught a school of Japanese kids in the LA area. So it was in LA that my dad had a church. He went independent. I don't need to go into that, but at any rate, he kept that up. Even after we moved to Arizona, he would travel back and forth. He had a small congregation. And so at any rate, it was, I heard my father speak of the orators of the Greek orators in the past, and because he was a public speaker as a minister, that was something that I was drawn to as well. In Future Farmers of America, public speaking was one of the contests that we would have, and so it was a good high school year. I had good teachers, so I did well, and I got a academic scholarship to what is now Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, but was then still just Arizona State College. And that was, I graduated high school spring of '61, and then went to college in Flagstaff in the fall. And December, my dad passed away. He was 78. He had, unaware, but he got just really sick, and passed, thankfully, quickly without too much. But that got me to thinking. I think from my heritage of Christianity and the scriptures and everything, I was coming to think outside the box and even think outside of some of my dad's theology. Even though if I was in a church that somebody spoke and they said something that disagreed with what my dad thought, I said, they probably don't know the Greek, and I just dismissed them. That was my young whatever. But anyhow, when he died, I got to thinking, what do I really believe? What are my beliefs? I had my parents' beliefs, but up to this point, what do I really believe? And I had never read the Bible. Now, you might say, what? Well, we had memory verses, but my mother told us the stories. I heard my dad teach the theology, and I was and still am a very slow reader. I think as I read. So at any rate, I decided to drop out of school. I turned my 4-year scholarship back in and said, I want to start reading the Bible and studying that. So I worked part-time as a construction laborer, and there was a young minister who was also in construction and provided some work for me along the way. He kind of took me in. I was a young man, 19 in 1982, and I went to Bible studies at his because he thought outside the box in some areas. And I thought, well, this is fascinating. And then the college offered some courses in Koine Greek at night school, and so I thought, well, I know a lot about it, but I'll go and take classes there. So I started taking I took classes, and I went ahead and just did what my dad had mostly done, was word studies and things like that. So that was going along, and then I had a brother who had gone to Yosemite to work at the, I don't know if some might be familiar with Degnan's in Yosemite National Park. He was managing the restaurant there. So I decided to go see him, and I drove out and then got a job there at the lodge. And that was, turned out to be, that was February of '65. And then I got a letter from the president. I was drafted. So I was like, I had skipped it because I was in college, but when I dropped out, they finally caught up with me. So I was in the Army from '65 to '67. I really grew up a lot during that. And I talked to Father a lot, saying, well, I believe in serving my country. I'm not a conscientious objector, but I don't want to kill people. What in this war, I don't know about in the Vietnam War. I don't know if this is right or whatever. So I had done well in math, both in high school and I had a year of college behind me in algebra and trig. So when I tested in, I was put into a school for artillery surveying. It's location of targets, target acquisition department. This is at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Went through a couple classes there, basic and then advanced, and then I and some others were asked if we'd like to stay on at the school as assistant instructors. Yes, I didn't hesitate. So I didn't have to go to Vietnam. I spent the rest of my 2 years at Fort Sill. I was very blessed. And coming from that, then I had the GI Bill instead of scholarships. And so I went back to school, got my bachelor's degree in anthropology. I won't bore you with the various. I first started in forestry, but the school was ruining the forest for me. Just as an aside, when we moved to Arizona, my dad couldn't understand, and this was in the 40s, there wasn't air conditioning, there were swamp coolers, but couldn't understand how anybody could stay in the desert. So we camped out for about 5 months every year from 1947 to 53. That was about 6 years, I guess, in the Sierras. We had a little campsite that was not too far from Yosemite. We'd go spend a couple of weeks in Yosemite. And then we had a community that was a retired chef from San Francisco. They had their campsite. We had our campsite, and we'd be there. We would leave the beginning of May before school was out, because we had school all summer long with my mother. And we come back beginning of October, a year after, or a month. So I was in the forest running wild through those years. It was wonderful. And so I thought I'd like forestry, but then when I went to forestry school, it was all about timber production and cutting trees, and trees became a problem rather than an enjoyment. And I thought, I don't know. Well, I'll make some long story short. I wound up getting my degree in anthropology because I didn't know about peoples of the world or archaeology or anything. And a friend in the dorm said he was there. He was all jazzed about it. Oh, okay. So my junior year, I switched majors and had to pick up a minor from some of the forestry courses. And so I got my degree in anthropology, but I didn't know what I'd do with that. I wound up, in between, I had taken some time off. I hitchhiked from Southern Arizona to Miami Beach, Florida, because my dad had been married before, so had my mother, but there was a half brother that was in Miami Beach, Florida. I said, I'm gonna go down and see him. So they had a little hotel there, and they made accommodations for me. And so I worked as a bellman in one of the larger hotels in Bal Harbour, Florida. Then Yosemite Park and Curry Company contacted me because when I was going to school, I worked both at the lodge in 64, and then I came back in 65 when I was there when I was drafted. Well, the Curry Company knew that I knew food service, and the United Auto Workers, at the time Walter Reuther was the president, was establishing a family education center in Michigan on a small lake called Black Lake near Onaway, upper part of the lower peninsula. And so they flew me up because I said, you're gonna have to send me a ticket. I'm not making much money here. They flew me up to open the food service. And I said, I'm gonna go back to college. This was before I finished my degree. So I went from February through September, I think, there. And that was a lot of fun. I loved the people, the rural people in southern Michigan were just the friendliest, greatest people. They'd take me in and feed me. I was this young kid, out on his own. Well, while I was there, I bought a car and then I said I had a sister now working in Yosemite. Yosemite was a big part of our whole family's history. So I thought, before I go back to Flagstaff, I'm going to go the long way, and I'm going to drop in to Yosemite. And my sister then introduced me to this beautiful young lady named Linda. And then that was starting of fall 1970, and in 71, we were married. And we started a life together, and it's been wonderful and exciting, challenging, and all the things you would expect. So that's kind of the back history. I wound up, after we were married, I was invited to Flagstaff to this friend that I had known back in the early 60s. And this was in 77. And he said, "We've got a lot of construction going on. Why don't you come?" I said, "I'm not really a carpenter." And he said, "I'll put you on a crew," which they did. And so I took notes on what length and everything to do. And I worked for 6 years, and we were able to build our own home, Linda and I. And it was amazing just how things worked out. But that's a story in itself. So I worked for 6 years, and then construction fell out in the latter part of 1980. And somebody said, "Oh, the post office hiring." And I said, "The post office? That was never in my view." Well, I went down. I was making as much as I was a carpenter from them, but I had both insurance and days off, and so it was like there were benefits in other itself. So I went there, and turned out I worked there for 29 years. And it was during that period that I took up on the side study of Greek again. I started building my library and reading scholars, reading advanced grammars on translating, and I had a collection of a dozen or so Bibles, because I loved other translations. I was keyed into this because I think from my father's study, and it's like, hey, words can mean this, or it can also mean that. In 1988, I started translating, and I translated the book of Jude. Very short, yeah. And I had no plans of doing much. It was just something to do. But I was hooked. And so I continued. I bought manuals on translating from the United Bible Society, and my library just was expanding, and I was reading, and I was in another independent study of another master's degree, so to speak. But anyhow, little by little, I got it translated, then revised, and by 2010, I published the first edition of this. It's a New Testament, and it is. It says it's expanded, it's amplified with multiple renderings, because if something could be rendered more than one way, parenthetically I put it in. And so this book is over 600 pages, just the New Testament. And and I think the main thing I'm doing, because I think it's all good news. I don't think there's any bad news in there. But bad news crept in my humble opinion, through religious organizations. So I did that. I published in 2010, and I've been revising it we self-published. Our son is our publisher and created the books and everything. And because I didn't want somebody else taking control and changing things so that they could sell them. because we're not part of any organization, not part of any religious group, but my research went from Catholic to Protestant. Anybody who had one of my favorite theologians was Paul Tillich, and I loved it because he used words that were not the normal words, for like he called God, instead of using the term God, he said the ground of being. He was a philosopher. I don't know if people are familiar with him, but anyhow, that led to I guess I've done about 8 different. I started writing commentaries on the books of the Bible based on my translation and my study of scholars. I'd bring other scholars in and did one on the Gospel of John, and over 600 pages on the book of Revelation. I titled it The End of the Old and the Beginning of the New. And because my view was, no, this is talking about something in the first century, not something farther than that. First and Second Corinthians. My latest one was the spoken and lived out parables of Jesus, because I believe that the Gospels were crafted in such a way to be more than they weren't just a history or a story. Other books, some of my first ones took one of our daughter's pictures of, this is somewhere off of Greece. This is, I did one on the Gospel of Mark, and I included Acts and Philemon, and then I put in a section on the Sermon on the Mount, which covered kind of Matthew and Luke. So I didn't do separate translations or commentaries on them. Galatians, Hebrews, the letters of John, this one, and a whole book on the book of Romans, and then 2 Peter and Ephesians. So all these commentaries have been what I've been doing since I published, and I keep updating. Well, the latest version of my New Testament is the 2019 edition. And because of our printer, which is Lightning Source, part of the Ingram group, Amazon sells our books, we don't have any budget for advertising. It's all word of mouth. But we've been selling for 15 years, just a few a month, and from all over. I was excited to get an email from someone who I knew that English was their second language, from Myanmar. And this guy says, I have a Bible school. I have 8 students. And I says, I'm using stuff from your website. We have 2 websites. One I was first just gifted to be on, and then those who produced it died, actually. And so there's just a couple of us left, but we're still actively producing. And then our son created a website for having access. And what we've done, because we see this as kind of a worldwide missionary effort, all of our material from our own website, the jonathanmnewtestament.com, is freely downloadable in PDF. And so our son told us that last month we had 5,000 visitors and about 400 people visiting the pages to download. So I get questions from all over that I'm kept busy with just answering emails. Fortunately, I can go to my files and take something I've written and just copy and paste. That saves a lot of time. But that's, I think, kind of what I'm doing. And I've just done this off the cuff. I'm not sure if I've, I returned in 75. I returned to get a master's degree in anthropology. Part of my anthropology was linguistics study, And so that has influenced my translation work. And as well as using just lexicons, really looking at the language and trying to stay up with the latest. But there are a lot of translators that I disagree with. Of course, that's why I did my own. So I guess as far as my personal thing, like with health things, I don't know if you would like me to do some of the challenges. One reason that I've stayed with one of my health challenges, well, I've got cataracts, my hearing loss, a hernia, sleep apnea, trigger finger, and probably some other things. But I have had two of our daughters teach in the UK. They teach on military bases over there, our military bases. And they come back every summer, and they have noticed, I came to quantum healing in 2022. I was with Cynthia earlier calls on other subjects, but at any rate, they observed that in the last 3 years, they're seeing me do things that I hadn't been able to do before physically. And so they decided to, this last year, I think it was, they became members and joined on. And so I was happy to see that. Both Linda and I noticed that our hair grows faster than it used to. Our nails, the hard thing is when your toenails grow too fast, you have to keep, and older people, sometimes it's a challenge, toenails. But anyhow, that's just, I'm saying that for humor. But yeah, I think that's the main story that I have to tell. And I'm currently still working from time to time, as well as translating the Old Testament from the Greek version, the Septuagint. And I use those in some of my studies. A lot of my studies will come from someone asking a theological question. And so I'll develop a study because that gives food to go on to the internets. But it's been a wonderful life. Before coming to, I heard about what Cynthia was doing in 2022, and we had heard of the possibility of things called med beds, and we thought, yeah, we'd like to support that however we can. But anyhow, it's been a wonderful life. It's been a walk of faith. I could go into that. There's so many things. You live this long, I could talk for an hour, but I see I've gone over about a half hour. So I think people have probably gotten enough of me for now. So thank you very much, Tracy. We love you guys. We support you. We pray for you. And we're looking for blessings for all humanity through this entire work.
Join us on the Prequel, where every story matters and every voice is heard. Because here at QHS, we're all about healing, learning, and growing together.